these lectures is get to the level of understanding that's necessary for doing our kind of work and of course, passing our tests, passing state exams and so forth. So we don't cover every single thing that's important, but every single thing we do cover is important, say it like that. Okay, so radiation detection instruments. Radiation detection instruments are many and varied. Some detect only what are called decay events, okay, such as pulsed detectors. This is showing modes of operation. Pulsed detectors, like a Geiger counter. It would click every time it detects a decay event. What's the unit for decay events per second? Starts with a B. A B, as in boy. The unit for radioactivity? Becquerel. Becquerel, good. So a Geiger counter would measure things in becquerels, right? If it gives you 100 clicks every second, then the decay rate is 100 becquerels, right? It's 1 decay per second. We can measure the rate, right, which would give you an amount per hour, right? Or we can do what's called integration, which is measured measures accurately the cumulative total, right? If you know what the rate is and you know how long you've measured it for, you can determine what the total is. Okay. So as they say, clicks in pulse mode can be difficult to count, and in rate mode, variable rates such as natural radiation can make it difficult to determine an average. The most accurate way to measure a variable radiation source is to do what's called integrating and measure over a long period of time, then divide by the amount of time. So we're going to look at these different types of instruments and how they measure things. But what's important here is that there are characteristics of all detection devices. And there's 4 characteristics that we're going to follow, we're going to learn about. Sensitivity is the ability to detect small amounts of radiation. The larger your detector is, the more sensitive it is. We'll cover each of these in depth in a moment here. 2, accuracy, precision of measurement. So sensitivity and accuracy, there's some relationship there. 3rd is called resolving time, minimum time between ionization events that can be detected. So if the rate is very high, the rate of radioactivity is very high, you'd need something with a very short resolving time so that it could detect and then reset very quickly to detect again. And 4thly, range. Matching of the instrument's design and sensitivity to the type of radiation, the energy levels and intensity levels to be detected. So range is not how far can I stand from the radiation and detect it. It is my detector calibrated to detect that type of radiation? It's kind of like your radio, your car radio, right? You only hear the station if you're tuned into that station, right? This is a similar thing. You are tuning in to the type of radiation. If your range must fit the type of radiation you're detecting. It's also like your eyeball, right? Your eyeball is sensitive to visible light. That's its range. Its range is all of the visible light. It cannot detect ultraviolet and it cannot detect infrared. Your eye cannot do that. So you have a limited range to your eyeball, and radiation detection devices have a limited range to them. Those are our 4 characteristics. Let's see how they can be used in practice. So the 2 ways to increase the sensitivity of a detection device. The first is to enlarge the size of the detecting chamber, making it more likely for small amounts of radiation to interact with it. So that shows you a detector surface shown in green, and the larger the surface, the more sensitive it is, because in this case there's only 2 photons, And in the smaller detector surface, both of those photons happen to miss the detector. With the larger detector, both of those photons happen to hit it. Okay, the smaller detector would tell you there's no radiation present. The larger detector would tell you there was two photons, two ionization events could have happened. More possibly, but the important thing is two photons of energy hit that detector. So detector surfaces matter. Large detectors are better than small detectors. If you go and like Google Geiger counters on the internet, you will find that you can find very cheap ones, and you can also find very expensive ones. One of the things that makes a Geiger counter very cheap versus very expensive is the very cheap ones have very small detectors. They're not very sensitive. They could detect some radiation, but they're not sensitive to very small amounts of radiation. And importantly, they also will not be very accurate. The second way to increase sensitivity, if you can't make your detector larger, it's to amplify the signal. So one important thing to know is that every ionization event can generate and does generate electric charge in the air. If that ionization event happens inside of a detector, it generates an electric charge inside of the detector. That electric charge will generate a small amount of current in the device, a small amount of electric current in the device. If in this case they say if you needed 2 milliamps of current to move the needle at all on your detector to show something, right? To show that you measured something. And your amplification, so notice here over here on the left, it says you have a source of radiation at 10 micrograys. That's the exposure, right? Your device amplifies that amount of radiation to be 1 milliamp of electric current, okay? But in this case, we're saying we needed 2 milliamps of current to even move the needle at all, okay? So with 10 micrograys, and your amplification is only to 1 milliamp of current, then you're not sensitive to 10 micrograys, okay? If your amplification is only to 1 milliamp from 10 micrograys of exposure, you won't move the needle, you won't show anything, you're not sensitive. If instead your 10 microgray source is brought through your equipment and the equipment amplifies the 10 microgray source, the amount of electricity generated from that, it amplifies it to 10 milliamps instead of 1 milliamp, well then your needle's going to move and you're going to show that you had detected some radiation. So every device gets an amount of radiation and it amplifies the signal to make an electric current to move the needle. If the device has a larger amplification, then it's more sensitive. But importantly, the more the amplification is, the less accurate the meter will be. So you can be more sensitive, but be less accurate at the same time, which is, you have to kind of balance those two things. This is why it's so important to have a large detector surface, the largest possible detector surface you can have, because that's the best way to be sensitive, is just to have a big detector surface, okay? The second best way is amplify the incoming signal. That way our detector gauge, our needle actually moves. Okay, the needle could be a literal needle, right? Or it could be like a digital gauge. It doesn't matter, but the point is, with bigger signal amplification, you can detect things at lower levels, but you're less accurate when you do it. Okay. So accuracy. Accuracy can be affected by the sensitivity, as I explained just a moment ago. A meter that is more sensitive can be more accurate, but a meter that is more sensitive by signal amplification can actually be less accurate. Alignment of scale, electronic noise. Noise is amplified when you amplify signal. Okay. Recall from principles of exposure, those of you who have been with me for long enough, when we make an X-ray, so turn your brain off from this stuff. When we make an X-ray exposure, we want an image with minimal fogging, right? We said we want a high signal to noise ratio, right? Electronic noise is you had your signal from the source of radiation, it created some electric current, we amplified that signal. Because we amplified the signal, we amplify also whatever noise, whatever electronic noise the device also has, and that's going to take away from your accuracy. Okay, this is what I was trying to get at with sensitivity. The more sensitive a device is, the more noise it will have. The more amplification you have, the more noise you have. So noise and accuracy work inversely to each other. The more electronic noise there is, the less accurate the device is. And of course, something running on low electric power, right? Run-down batteries, that's going to decrease accuracy. We can pretty much fix that now. Do you guys know what type of batteries your phones typically use? Like they don't use AA batteries, lithium ion, right? Lithium ion has this property to it that they don't like a AA battery, like in your remote. It'll just keep decreasing in voltage until the device stops working. You notice that like your remotes get a little less responsive on your TV remotes. Then it's like just God, I have to like press the button a bunch of times, and then eventually like it just stops working, right? But your phones don't do that. Your phones just work, right? And then they shut off when they're done working, right? The batteries in our phones and importantly in these newer batteries in most devices are lithium ion, and they have this quality that where they protect themselves by when the voltage drops to a certain level, they just shut off. They call themselves dead before they're actually dead. Okay, and that can keep this idea of the rundown batteries from happening. Now, that is, of course, your meter has to run on lithium ion, but importantly, there's a workaround for electrical power loss. Involved with accuracy is interrogation time. That's the time from the actual detection in the device to the readout on the screen. Okay? That is involved with resolving time. Resolving time is how much time was there from the detection event till you can measure your next event. Okay? If I can only measure 1 decay per second, then any source with radioactivity of more than 1 decay per second is going to look like 1 event per second. Make sense? So if I had a source at 1 event per second, 1 becquerel, I'm going to be able to measure that, right, with my meter. But if I had a source of 2 becquerels, 2 events per second, my meter's still going to tell me 1. It's still going to say there's only 1 because my resolving time only lets me measure 1 per second in this case. Okay? So the amount of time between ionization events is called between detectable ionization events is called resolving time. The shorter your resolving time, the more accurate your device can be. So you want the shortest resolving time. And you also want the shortest interrogation time possible. The longer the interrogation times, the less accurate, and the longer the resolving times are, the less accurate the devices are. So to be sensitive, you have a large detector, you have adequate signal amplification. To be accurate, you have short interrogation times and short resolving times. I'm not going to make you work with the resolving time formula. Okay, so any of that I'm not going to make you work with. But I will briefly talk about range. This is the last of the ideas. The sensitivity of the device's electronics on scales and meters must be matched to the expected intensity levels of the radiation. Again, as I said, your eyes are only sensitive to visible light, so that's the range for your eyes, visible light. Everything above and below that range, you're not sensitive to. So it's the design of the detection chamber to accommodate the types of radiation to be detected and the expected energy levels for those types of radiation. So the materials used for detection must allow penetration of the radiation into the chamber. Like if you have an ion chamber and it's made of lead, like the actual chamber is made of lead, well then you're not going to be measuring X-rays because X-rays are not penetrating that lead, right? So you must make the machine out of something that allows the radiation source to get into the ionization chamber and cause ionization. For example, a Geiger counter is too sensitive for diagnostic X-rays. Its range is far below the intensity for X-ray beams. This is one reason why you can't take a Geiger counter and stick it under your X-ray tube and measure the radiation, because it's not designed for use in the radiation in the primary beam. It's designed for measuring single atoms decaying, right? It's not designed for measuring large amounts of radiation in the air. Okay. Yeah.
Can you set another example? I'm having a hard time with this one.
What's that?
Another example with range, like.
I didn't hear the first thing you said. I'm sorry.
I said that I'm having a hard time with like understanding range. Do you have another example that can kind of?
Yeah. So I gave the eye example, right?
Okay.
We could also say like. I guess the best is with talking about electromagnetic radiation wavelength. Okay, let's say I wanted to detect X-rays. Okay, a Geiger counter cannot detect X-rays. Okay, because it's designed to detect lower energy levels. So it's the energy level of the expected energy level of the radiation that you're dealing with. If you're expected to be measuring high level radiation, then you want your meter to be able to measure high levels of radiation. If you want to detect low levels of radiation, such as single atoms emitting things, then you're going to design a meter that can detect low levels of radiation. So that's the range for the meter. A meter with a range of energy detection that is low on the low end cannot detect the high end stuff. And a meter that is designed for high-end radiation detection cannot detect the low end. The best meters do not have an extremely wide range. The best meters have a narrow range of energies that they can detect, and they're designed for very specific energy levels. And they'll be very accurate within that range. But up above and below those energy levels, the meter just can't see those types of radiations. That's what range has to deal with. Yeah. My favorite example is the eye, because your eye has a range of light that it can see and a range of light above and below that energy levels that it cannot see, right? And you're tuned into this range, right? Okay.
So, question.
Yeah.
So, would you need a high or a low meter to detect the radiation coming off of a banana?
A Geiger counter can do it. So low levels of radiation, yeah, low levels, low energy, single emissions per second, that kind of thing. Yeah. I actually have a Geiger counter, but it went out of service and it's not serviceable anymore. So I ordered a new one. It's just not here yet. So on the next class, I'll be able to show you guys the Geiger counter. We'll take background measurements and banana measurements and stuff like that. Yeah, we'll get a little bit of time with the detection device. Okay. So accuracy is important, right? You can be very sensitive, but not accurate, right? I can be sensitive to very low levels of radiation, but not be able to tell you if it's 1, 2, 3, or 4 emissions per second, right? I can detect that it is down low. Something's happening down low here, but I can't detect how much exactly. So accuracy and sensitivity are different things. Higher accuracy, in general, results from being increasingly sensitive. However, there's the type of sensitivity involved with signal amplification that decreases accuracy. So that's important, is to minimize electronic noise. Devices have a way of minimizing electronic noise, but increased sensitivity in general makes things accurate. Your range, right? Your range of measurements matters. The range that you can measure things in matters. And most importantly, resolving time. the time between ionization events. Again, if you can detect one event per second, then you cannot be more accurate than 1 becquerel. And if a decay event is 10 becquerels, then you can't, if a decay source is rate is 10 becquerels, you cannot detect that. Okay? So resolving time is probably the most important. And unfortunately, sensitivity and range tend to work against each other. The more sensitive it is, the narrower the range will be. So again, as I said, the best devices are highly sensitive, but to a very narrow range of energies. Okay, cheaper, less expensive detectors might have a very wide range, but will likely not be very sensitive anywhere in that range. It'll tell you what's happening. There's something happening within this energy range, but we can't tell you exactly what it is. We have some error bars. Okay. Okay. So sensitivity and range work against each other.